There's a strange, almost painful truth buried beneath the laughter Richard Cheech Marin and Tommy Chong gave the world. For decades, we saw them as the ultimate stoner duo, fearless, hilarious, and untouchable. But behind the smoke-filled jokes was a journey shaped by fear, exile, rejection, and a partnership that often came close to collapse. Their story wasn't built on ease. It was built on survival, on two men running in opposite directions from the lives they never wanted, only to collide in a place neither expected. What they created together changed comedy forever. But the path that led them there was far darker and far more unbelievable than most people realize. And once you know what really happened before the fame, the laughter feels different. The chaotic collision that should never have happened. Long before they became icons, Richard Cheech Marin and Tommy Chong were two men searching for escape. Each from a completely different nightmare. Cheech grew up in South Los Angeles, raised by a police officer father in a world where discipline overshadowed creativity. By his early 20s, he wasn't chasing comedy or fame. He was studying pottery at California State University Northridge, imagining a quiet life surrounded by clay, not chaos. But the late 1960s made quiet dreams nearly impossible. The Vietnam War draft haunted every young man's future, and Cheech, who deeply opposed the war, found himself cornered. Staying meant risking everything. Leaving meant abandoning everything he knew. In the end, fear made the choice for him. He fled to Canada, not because of adventure or rebellion, but because he didn't want to die in a war he didn't believe in. While Cheech was running from being forced into violence, Tommy Chong was experiencing the opposite Chong. Born in Edmonton, Alberta, to a Chinese father and a Scottish-Irish mother, grew up surrounded by music, clubs, and the unpredictable rhythm of show business. By the late 60s, he had already tasted fame as a guitarist with Bobby Taylor and the Vancouvers, a Motown-signed band poised for success. But music faded. The band dissolved, and Chong found himself back in Vancouver searching for a new direction. That direction appeared in the strangest possible form. A topless bar his family owned called the Shanghai Junk. Chong saw that customers weren't paying attention to the dancers, so he added an improvisational comedy troupe to the strip show, mixing nudity with theater in a way no one had tried before. It was into this world, half nightclub, half chaotic theater, that Cheech wandered in 1970, looking for any job that could help him survive as a draft dodger. When the two men first saw each other, it wasn't friendship, magic, or recognition. It was confusion. Two strangers from opposite lives staring at each other as if asking, "What are you?" No one watching them in that moment could have imagined that their unlikely collision would rewrite comedy history, but the world was about to shift. The accidental spark that turned strangers into a duo. The moment Cheech joined Chong's bizarre improvisational troupe inside the Shanghai Junk Strip bar, something shifted, slowly, awkwardly, and not at all in the way legends usually begin. Chong already had a group of actors, dancers, and drifters who performed short sketches between strip routines. The environment was chaotic, but strangely alive. Cheech, meanwhile, was simply desperate for work. He wasn't trying to be funny. He was trying to stay fed and stay hidden. But when Chong introduced him to the troupe, something happened that neither man expected. Their improv style was wild and free, built on instinct rather than scripts. Chong, who had recently seen Second City and The Committee, pushed everyone to experiment. Cheech, with no formal comedy background, slipped into this rhythm like he had been waiting for it without knowing. Their first spark didn't happen on purpose. It happened because they were both comfortable being uncomfortable. One night, during a performance, they slipped into a loose routine about a guy looking for his friend Dave. Neither of them planned it. Neither of them rehearsed it, but when Cheech kept repeating, "Dave's not here," the audience erupted. In that accidental moment, the foundation of their career was born. They didn't understand what they had yet, but they felt it. The chemistry wasn't built on friendship or even trust, it was built on contrast. Chong was mellow, mystical, almost floating. Cheech was sharp, fast, tense, and electric. Their personalities collided like two mismatched notes, somehow creating harmony, but this harmony came at a cost. Both men were dealing with private pressures that shaped their work. Cheech lived in fear of being caught and dragged back to the U.S. to face prison. Chong carried the weight of a failing music career and the pressure of keeping his family's business alive. Fame, friction, and the love-hate bond that nearly destroyed them. As Cheech and Chong's reputation began to spread through Vancouver and across the U.S., their partnership grew stronger on stage, but far more fragile behind the scenes. What fans never saw was that the duo's connection was never built on deep friendship. Cheech would later say, "We're brothers, we're not best friends." That wasn't a sweet metaphor. It was an admission of the emotional strain that defined their working relationship. They argued constantly, sometimes viciously, and over everything: characters, jokes, scheduling, credit, and especially creative control. Chong, who naturally drifted toward leadership roles, believed himself to be the conceptual architect of their projects. Cheech, who contributed just as much to the writing and comedic rhythm, often felt pushed aside. When they began making films, this tension intensified. Tommy directed 4 out of their 6 feature movies between 1978 and 1984, something Cheech later called a very touchy thing. It wasn't just a credit issue, it was about power, identity, and recognition. On stage, none of this showed. They could fight for hours backstage and then walk out and deliver a flawless performance that made audiences roar. Their tension became the fuel that drove their comedy. Cheech once compared their dynamic to an oyster forming a pearl. Irritation turned into beauty under pressure. But that pressure was slowly crushing them. Touring made everything worse. In the 1970s, Cheech and Chong performed more than 300 days a year, living out of suitcases, recording new material on the road, and improvising jokes in cars, hotels, and dressing rooms. They looked like carefree stoners on stage, but off stage they were exhausted, overworked, and, ironically, health-obsessed. While their fans imagined them high 24/7, the truth was they spent most of their free time at YMCA gyms in every city, exercising, trying to survive the brutal schedule. As their fame exploded with Grammy nominations, chart-topping albums, and sold-out shows, the cracks widened. Chong became protective of the duo's image and direction, while Cheech yearned for more creative freedom. The more successful they became, the deeper their resentment grew. By the early 1980s, the partnership that had once felt accidental and magical was turning into something heavy, suffocating, and unsustainable. The breakup nobody saw coming, and the silence that followed. By the time the early 1980s arrived, the tension between Cheech and Chong, once just background noise to their creativity, had turned into a force powerful enough to pull them apart. Their partnership had always walked a fragile line, but the breaking point came quietly, almost anticlimactically, during the making of Nice Dreams in 1981. That film, like many of their projects, was built on a thin script, just 3.5 pages, and a mountain of improvisation and storyboarded gag work. While the process looked chaotic from the outside, it was actually carefully controlled, and that control increasingly fell to Chong. Cheech felt himself becoming a side character in the very duo he helped build. Chong wanted to direct everything, write everything, shape everything. What used to feel like collaboration now felt like possession. And while both men kept performing as if nothing was wrong, the quiet resentment was growing into something irreversible. The final fracture came in 1985 when Cheech presented a project he believed could refresh their brand, a song called Born in East L.A. He wanted Chong to help record it and turn it into their next comedic venture, but Chong refused. Maybe he didn't see Cheech's vision, or maybe he feared that a project led by Cheech would shift their power dynamic. Whatever the reason, his refusal cut deeper than either man admitted at the time. For Cheech, it wasn't just a no. It was a moment of clarity. If the partnership couldn't bend, it would have to break. Cheech went solo. He produced Born in East LA without Chong, and ironically, the project became both a commercial and critical success. It affirmed something he had long suspected. He didn't need the duo to succeed, but success didn't soften the emotional blow. The breakup wasn't explosive. There were no dramatic public statements or fights. Instead, there was silence. Years of it. Chong later reflected on that period with something close to regret, admitting that his hunger for control had blinded him. Meanwhile, Cheech spent the next decade building a new identity, acting in Nash Bridges, branching into voice acting, and becoming one of the most recognizable Chicano entertainers in America. Chong drifted into activism, small roles, and eventually, infamously, into a federal prison cell for selling glass pipes. A moment that revealed the darker consequences of the counterculture they once championed. The breakup hurt both of them, not because they lost a friend, but because they lost the one person who understood the world they built, and the world they escaped from reinvention, isolation, and the strange turns their lives took. After their split, the world assumed Cheech and Chong had simply drifted into separate creative paths, but the truth was far messier, heavier, and filled with unexpected reinventions that shaped who they became. Cheech Marine, suddenly on his own after nearly 17 years of being defined as half of a duo, faced a terrifying question. Who am I without Chong? For years, audiences had only known him as the fast-talking, streetwise stoner, but Cheech had far more range than people realized. Slowly, he carved out a legitimate acting career. His role as Joe Dominguez on Nash Bridges helped him reinvent himself as a mainstream television actor. And in the world of animation, where his voice could escape the stereotypes that had boxed him in, he found unexpected success. Disney cast him as Banzai in The Lion King, followed by Ramon in Cars, and roles in films like Fern Gully. Yet the triumphs didn't erase the quiet melancholy beneath his success. Cheech was proud of his achievements, proud of becoming one of the most respected Chicano entertainers in America, but he was also carrying the unspoken weight of being misunderstood. The world still saw him through a cloud of smoke, laughing at a persona that no longer matched the man he had grown into. Tommy Chong's journey was even more unpredictable. While Cheech entered Hollywood's mainstream, Chong drifted toward activism and counterculture advocacy. He played the lovable stoner Leo on that 70s show, but behind the scenes, he was battling something darker. In 2003, he was arrested and sentenced to federal prison for selling glass pipes, an event that felt surreal even to him. The U.S. government made him a symbol, targeting him not for violence or harm, but for representing the very drug culture the authorities wanted to stamp out. During his incarceration, Chong confronted loneliness, regret, and the fading echo of the fame he once enjoyed. When he emerged and documented the experience in the film AKA Tommy Chong, he revealed a sobering truth. Their comedy had once felt harmless, but now it had become a political battleground he never intended to fight on. Even in their separation, both men carried the shadow of the duo they once were. Their success was real, but it came with the haunting sense that something unfinished lingered between them, a bond built on conflict, talent, and an era that had changed forever, the myths, secrets, and strange truths no one expected. Long after their breakup, the world continued to celebrate Cheech and Chong as the kings of stoner comedy, but only a handful of people truly understood how strange, unbelievable, and sometimes painful their behind-the-scenes story really was. Their legacy was shaped not just by fame, but by a series of bizarre twists that still surprise fans today. One of the most startling revelations was how close they came to stepping outside comedy entirely. In the mid-1980s, Friday the 13th Part 6 director Tom McLaughlin pitched a crossover featuring Cheech and Chong as clueless camp counselors or marijuana farmers who accidentally cross paths with Jason Voorhees. It sounds like a parody, but it was completely serious. If the studio had agreed, the duo might have found themselves in one of the most iconic slasher franchises in history, blending humor and horror in a way no one had ever attempted. Another lesser-known truth is that one of their most famous visual gags, the MUFDVR license plate from Up in Smoke, wasn't created by them at all. The plate belonged to a real Los Angeles police officer who drove multiple cars with it over the years, from a beat-up AMC Gremlin to a Corvette. The irony of a cop unintentionally becoming part of cannabis comedy history is the kind of twist that perfectly mirrors the absurdity of Cheech and Chong's world. And then there's the story that feels almost too surreal to believe. Jack Nicholson, attending an early screening of Up in Smoke with a dislocated shoulder, he had just been in a car accident and was under strict orders not to laugh, but he couldn't help himself. Every joke forced painful groans and gasps out of him, yet he kept watching, kept reacting, and unknowingly became the most honest test audience the filmmakers ever had. Even their film process defied logic. Their movie, Nice Dreams, was built on a script barely 3.5 pages long, a skeletal outline that relied entirely on improvisation and detailed storyboards. That chaotic looseness was their secret ingredient, the reason their comedy felt alive, because it was born in real time. And beyond the jokes, the albums, and the films, there was something deeper. They were pioneers who pushed taboo into the spotlight, helped shift public attitudes about marijuana, influenced generations of comedians, and left behind cultural marks still visible today. They broke rules not to shock people, but because neither of them knew any other way to survive. Their story isn't just about comedy. It's about two men whose lives collided by accident, whose partnership was shaped by fear, ego, brilliance, and pain, and whose impact is larger than the myth that surrounds them. Which of these Cheech and Chong facts surprised you the most? Tell us in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like, subscribe, and check out the next video waiting for you on the screen.